Good morning, everybody, and welcome along to this edition of the Pat Barry Show on LearnMedia.tv. All the information is on the bottom of your screen there for you to peruse. Good morning, Barry Shaw, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Tuesday, the 29th of July, we are speaking, and Barry is over in Israel. And I suppose this is a very loose program. We can discuss whatever we like, and we're not afraid to discuss topics that we call that the mainstream media may choose to ignore. Here in Ireland, it's quite there's a quite an appalling attitude to the war that's going on with Israel and Hamas at the moment, as if and we have a war going on in our own continent of Europe between Russia and the Ukraine, which barely gets a mention on our national broadcaster, which is RTE. The obsession with Israel is absolutely. What are you hearing over there, Barry, on your side?
Well, we're hearing a lot of pack of lies and everything being spread about Israel, and we're deeply concerned about the tilt in the West, which seems to be to us going off the logical and correct cultural path into a very dark and dangerous place, and trying to drag Israel down with it.
Yeah, I'd say that is a good summation of what we're experiencing here. As I said, it's an obsession here in the media in Ireland, and there's a horrific wars going on as we speak in the Congo, in Sudan, in Yemen, and they really get a mention or a picture as well. They're taking all their news, what I can see, from Hamas here in Ireland. And as you know, there was a hearing recently in our own parliament in Dublin. Dáil Éireann is the parliament on the occupied territories bill. I don't know whether you heard of that or not. The so-called occupied territories bill, which is on they've been trying to pass that bill now for a couple of years, and it's in committee stage now in Dáil. That's why I was hearing on it, and I don't know, did you hear much about that over on your side of the water?
Yeah, well, I hope during our conversation I can give you and your listeners, and I want to thank them for their support of Israel, but I want to supply you and them with a lot of facts and information you probably don't get over there in your media or from your politicians.
Yes.
And it must be very difficult for people over there, if the only information you're getting is from your own media and your politicians, to really understand the truth of what's going on over here. And I want to dispel a lot of the lies bit by bit, but giving you a truthful, and I'll take it from a personal as well as a professional perspective as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't hear the media and we don't hear what I call claw thumpers asking for Saudi Arabia to do food drops in Yemen, for instance. And we don't hear them asking Russia to do food drops in Ukraine or any other country like that. Not alone is Israel expected to defend itself against a horrific attack, but they're expected to feed their enemy as well and clothe them and keep them safe. I mean, it's madness. I think myself, it's absolute cruelty. You know.
Yeah, and we're horrified because we see on our TVs over here, maybe from the BBC and Sky News in the UK, for instance, and I've got some personal examples I can share with you
Yeah.
how I've brought up Sky News in particular for the lies they spread on a daily basis. And the latest thing that we're hearing coming out of European leaders or even the United Nations is that, we're committing genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
And I'd like to go into this with a lot of facts and information, and
Yes.
I'm doing so because I'm hoping that some of the people who are listening to us right now will take these figures and act on them. But truth be told, the Palestinian National Project is the real genocidal campaign. And anyone who followed my books or my writings will know that historically, based on both Yasser Arafat, and the Mahmoud Abbas Soviet bias that began even before then with Haj Amin al-Husseini, brand of Jew-hated Islam, that's going back to the 1920s. And if you look at the whole history of what Douglas Murray wrote in a book of being a Palestinian death cult, it goes back a century before there was even an Israel, never mind Palestine, right?
Yeah.
And it starts with Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was a real religious rebel rouser in Jerusalem, who was responsible for a pogrom in the old city of Jerusalem in the 1920s. And that was at a time where the Jews, even then, 100 years ago, were a majority in Jerusalem. And it was under British control after the First World War. People can get my book, 1917, From Palestine to the Land of Israel, to understand the history.
Yes.
And he was forced to flee. But just to prove that it's nothing to do with Jews in Palestine over here, or Israelis, or Zionists. When he ran away from British justice, you know where he went to? He went to Iraq, to Baghdad, and he insinuated himself in, again, the Islamic movement in that country, which at that time had just finished with Germany, was also occupying Iraq in the First World War. But he arrived as we were coming up to the Second World War, and he incited, believe it or not, another pogrom, a pogrom against the Jews in Baghdad, Iraq, nothing to do with Palestine. And in order to avoid justice, this was British justice again, he ran away. Where did he run away to? Do you people know that? He went to Berlin, to Hitler, where he offered his services in order to develop, with the success of Nazi Germany, the final solution of the Jewish problem in the Middle East. And they were waiting on Rommel to come across the North African desert in order to enter into what was that post-Ottoman Turkish Palestine area, if you wish, in order to do it. And Montgomery managed to hold him back. Now, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, and this is where I bring it more up to date, had to escape justice again. So he ran away from Berlin. He ended up in Egypt, where he was adopted by a very influential Egyptian family. And he began to rabble rise over there. In fact, he indoctrinated and he mentored a young Egyptian, who, as a result of Hajj Amin al-Husseini, he changed his name and he changed his identity. Instead of being an Egyptian, he became Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian.
Yeah, and as we know, the Gaza Strip.
The leader was fired.
Yeah, and the Gaza Strip was up to 1967 was part of Egypt, and Yasser Arafat became the de facto leader of the PLO, as it was styled then, in 1968. And there was an interview done with King Hussein of Jordan, who said that Jordan is Palestine, Palestine is Jordan. You know, if people want to know their history, but conveniently enough, people in the West are not interested in history. They're not interested in facts. They're not interested in anything like that. They're interested in the Hamas propaganda, and they take it as facts. But we have the Macron recently announcing the recognition of the state of Palestine. I'd like people to ask him the question, where is Palestine? Where is it today? Where is it? He wants to recognize the state of Palestine, which to me, well, it's no surprise because the French, they're sold to the Nazi regime during not so very long ago, during the Second World War anyway. So they have form in that kind of carry on, you know.
But this is why they changed they changed the language, they changed names, they change descriptions to suit their narrative, because you're describing, for instance, when Israel withdrew from territory in order to give peace a chance and reinstall Yasser Arafat in parts of what they call the West Bank, what we call Judea and Samaria, which was before it was called the West Bank, right? Where does Judea and Samaria come from? Comes from your Bible.
Yes.
Right? I didn't know that Judea and Samaria were part of a Palestinian nationhood in biblical days.
Yeah, I must say that it sounds more ludicrous the more you go into your facts and your history as well, you know. But getting back to today and the propaganda war that's going on at the moment, I think that Israel should pay more attention to that. What do you think yourself, Barry?
Yeah, well, I talk against the pogroms and the slaughter that were conducted under the rabble-rousing Haj Amin al-Husseini. This both in Jerusalem, where Jews were slaughtered, in Hebron, which was the biggest slaughter since thousands of years, perpetrated by this anti-Semite. He was after Jews. And, you know, if we're talking about Yasser Arafat, again, I'm going to make it personal here again. And I admit to you, I was living on kibbutz at that time, and I was a bit of a lefty, and I was saying, you know, John Lennon sort of give peace a chance sort of guy. Okay, you know, if we have to give up territory to these people who call themselves Palestinians, after the Arab armies have tried to destroy us 5 times in 5 Arab wars against Israel.
That's right, yeah.
Starting in 1948. But okay, we'll prepare to give up some land in order that the Palestinians want to live alongside us as peacemakers, give peace a chance, right? I was mugged by in 2021 and 2022, when after allowing Arafat to come back from exile, where he had been, and had been in the Israeli army, and we had been part of the Israeli army that drove the PLO and Yasser Arafat out of Lebanon, where he was into exile in Tunis. And we allowed him back again because he promised us peace of the brave, all right? But what we had, and why I was mugged in reality, is that part of his peace of the brave was unfurling on my hometown where I'm speaking to you now, Pat, Netanya, 8 separate suicide bombers from a town down the road called Tulkarem. If I were to turn my camera around, Pat, out of the window I'm looking at here, I could show you Tulkarem. And I'm living in Netanya. And I'm living, when you come and visit me, I'll take you from where I'm living for a 5-minute walk to the Mediterranean Sea, as in from the river to the sea.
Yes.
That's one of the shots, okay? Yeah. But we're not talking about here, from my personal experience, from the River Jordan to the sea. We're talking about Tulkarem, which is out of my window here, and I'm living 5 minutes walk from the sea. And Yasser Arafat unfurled and sent 8 suicide bombers. One of them was in the market and killed somebody who was working for me as an electrician. Another one almost killed my wife because she was going up to the shopping mall. Unfortunately, I made a call and invited her to come back to the office because somebody needed her. And instead of listening, instead of going with her natural instincts and going to a shopping mall to do whatever shopping she needed to do, she turned around. And then a minute later, after I put the phone down, she called. I get a call from her saying, "Barry, I think there was a suicide bomber." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I decided to come back to the office, and no sooner had I turned around than there was a huge explosion behind me. And sure enough, it was a second suicide bomber outside the shopping mall that killed people there. And then we had the massacre on Passover, because I always like picking Jewish holidays in order to have massacres. That had, again, blew people up. We were celebrating Passover, which is the Jewish festival of being brought out of slavery in Egypt, right?
Yes.
And I began to say, what the hell is going wrong? We trusted everything to these people. And I went in search of answers. And one of them came the year after the suicide bombing in the Park Hotel, where I had joined an organization in my town called the Netanya Terror Victims Organization to help the families and the victims of Palestinian terrorists, shooters, as well as suicide bombers. And I'm talking again from a personal perspective, so you can see how history plays out in our time. And
Absolutely.
at the first anniversary, one of the people there to talk to the audience that were there, maybe people like the terror victims or whatever, was somebody who had been the Israeli IDF chief of staff, Moshe Yahalon. And he told us something we hadn't heard of before, that when we were allowing Yasser Arafat to come back into the territories, treating him like a guest of honor, he was coming in with a big limousine, and Yasser Arafat wasn't a big guy, and he was sitting in the back, supposedly by himself. And Moshe Yaalon, the general, described it this way: he was there, and they stopped the limousine. Why? Because the limousine was being driven at an angle like this. It was slanted at the back, and he thought something was wrong with the vehicle. And he opened the door, and he found that Yasser Arafat was sitting on two banned terrorists who had not been allowed to come back from Tunis because they were mass murderers. And when they opened the boot at the back of the car, it was full of machine guns and weapons. This is Arafat, who promised us peace of the brave. And in fact, Pat, as I give anybody interested in listening, what he gave us instead was peace of the grave.
Yeah, absolutely. And Arafat was plain and simple a terrorist, even though it's a tame word for someone like him. And he was an Egyptian terrorist. That's all he was, you know. Arafat, and he enriched himself by the loan he left in the United Nations. And when he died in Paris, you remember the kerfuffle about the amount of money that his wife had when he died. It was astonishing. Blood money, you call it, or the United Nations money. And they backed him for some reason. They backed him to the hit. He went to the Camp David Accords at times. Remember with President, who was there? Bill Clinton, was it? Bill Clinton, was it?
Yeah, but it's funny you should raise that, Pat, because just the other day I was having a conversation from somebody in Malta who supports us. And these people are in a vast minority because they're very pro-Palestinian over there. But Malta is a place where Yasser Arafat's widow and daughter lives, and they're both billionaires. They have both... Arafat and the daughter own separate mansions in Malta. They own plenty of properties in London, and they have bank accounts in Switzerland. But that's all from the monies that were donated by your country and some others as well.
To the UN.
No, not just the UN. Britain, Ireland, all these countries that contribute towards the Palestinians, it goes towards their terror campaigns.
Yes.
But the point I want to make about Yasser Arafat, and I say this to audiences abroad, it is that the fact be told, Yasser Arafat killed more Jews after he received the Nobel Peace Prize than he murdered before.
Well, it's a shame. It's one of the shames of the world that he got a Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know what he got it for, because all his life was a life of destruction and rule and murder and mayhem. That's all his life amounted to, in my opinion, you know. And he got, the Nobel Peace Prize as if to say that he was a great peacemaker, which he was the exact opposite of that, you know, opposite.
But bringing it up to date, I would say that the event that we had over here, the genocidal attack invasion that we had on the 7th of October 2023, was not a standalone event. It's part of a campaign that included the suicide bombers, and it's gone on every day since. Actually, I want to just emphasize one thing. If you do the research, you will find that each of the suicide bombers that attacked us here in Netanya in 2001 and 2002 were all members of Hamas.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, you know.
Hamas is not confined to Gaza.
No, it's not. It's a movement. It's going to be very difficult for Israel to neutralize that organization, you know, even though they are doing a good job of it now, you know. But it's going to be very, very difficult to as I said, to make them less effective than what they are. Because as we both know, they're being bankrolled by the Iran, and there isn't enough emphasis on the country of Iran in all this conflict, and there never has been enough emphasis on Iran. For instance, in Ireland, the Iranian ambassador has never been called in, and now we see, as you know yourself, the Israeli embassy in Ireland is no longer there. They pulled out of Ireland, and we have a tiny Jewish community in here in Ireland where I live, and the only, I suppose, succor they had, or the only recourse they had up to now for safety was their embassy in Dublin, capital of Ireland, and now that no longer exists because of the appalling carry-on of our government mainly and our national broadcaster RTE, which takes their news from Hamas and rebroadcasts it out as facts, as the truth, which is a shameful carry-on. I never thought I'd live to see the day myself. But we have two main newscasts here in Ireland every day on television. We have 1 o'clock and 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock. And every single day, every day without fail, I've taken to the phones many times to complain to the newsroom in RTE about the fact that they're utterly obsessed with Hamas and utterly obsessed with the Gaza Strip and utterly obsessed with Palestine, which is not a country. Palestine is not a country. And how someone like Macron, although it is understandable when you frame it with history, how Macron can stand up and publicly declare that he's recognizing the state of Palestine, and nobody asked him, where is Palestine and what is it?
All right. I can tell you one thing that I'm addressing right now, and I'll get back to some other issues, is that there seems to be a trend in the last week or so of a lot of European countries in particular following the lead of Macron of France in declaring recognition of a Palestinian state and bringing it into the United Nations. The one thing that Macron, your leader, Starmer in Britain, and all the other misguided failures of leaders who are losing their own countries, let alone misdirecting things over here, is one thing. I would insist that any of these leaders, before shallowly declaring allegiance to a Palestinian state, to ask themselves if they're liberal democracies, would they not first insist that the Palestinians have an election and have them decide who they want leading them before it's taken to the United Nations, and the United Nations are approving European instructions in order to impose a state of Palestine? Because I think they may be shocked, or maybe they won't, if they find that the research that I've done, that every Palestinian poll and survey, and I repeat this, Palestinian based in Ramallah poll say that if there is a vote today in what you called the West Bank, in other words, the territories not under Hamas in Gaza, but under the Palestinian Authority, that Hamas will win with a majority of between 68 and 78%. So when your government follows Macron and Starmer in insisting recognition of a Palestinian state, what you are insisting is inflicting on us in Israel the next Hamas seated in Ramallah.
And all this is being done whilst that country holds hostages as well. And it's an aberration, in my way of thinking, total aberration. And these people should hang their heads in shame as far as I'm concerned. They do not represent Simon Harris and Micheál Martin do not represent me anyway, I can tell you that much, and a lot of people like me in this small country of ours, and they're making fools of themselves on the world stage, absolute fools of themselves on the world stage,
But you're right, because actually this war we're having over here, that really began on the 7th of October 2023, and it was imposed on us by this blood cult, Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. By the way, there were over 3,000 armed terrorist thugs from Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but they were followed by other 3,000 also regular Gazan people who took part, continued with the raping and the murder and the looting that went on. So this war that was forced on us is the most just war that Israel has ever been forced to fight since its establishment in 1948. And we've had many critical wars even before then.
Absolutely, yeah.
This war began with a massacre by the Palestinians, and we have every right in order to ensure that that threat will never happen again. And since then, Hamas, as you rightly said, have kept our Israelis hostage as well as their own people, if you want to put it that. But the own people fully support them. They're fully behind them. And they're doing it in what we call a Jew-hating blood cult. And it's part of that strategy that's been directing turned world opinion against us. They began on the campuses and in the streets, as you've seen, and now they're succeeding through the media and diplomatic manipulation.
Well, I think that Donald Trump as president has done a lot of work, particularly to do with the campuses in the United States, in America, to right that wrong somewhat, you know, the absolute appalling carry-on in the universities as well, again against Jews. And I think Donald Trump has done a lot of work there in his government in bringing the people to book over that, you know. He had them all in and answering questions. And I think he's trying to do something positive about that myself, you know, particularly in third level institutions. Of course, we had an incident here, I'm sure you read about it, where a young student, Jamie O'Mahony, attended a Palestinian meeting, if you could call it that, recently in Limerick in Ireland. And he stood up to ask a few questions to the speaker there, who to my mind shouldn't have been left into the country, but that's another story, and challenged what he was saying, and he was attacked for it, you know. You probably saw that, Barry, yourself on the media, on the news media, you know. And Jamie O'Mahony is a student in UCD in Dublin, and he started a branch of Irish Students for Israel, you know, and he came under severe criticism for that, not alone in the university, but our so-called leaders, you know, in Ireland as well, you know. But anyway, I had the pleasure of interviewing him. Very level-headed young man, very level-headed, and well able to speak as well, and well informed as well, you know, which an awful lot of the media could take their lead from in Ireland, you know.
Is there any chance that Ireland will actually begin seeing things as they really are, not as they imagine it to be or wish it to be or whatever?
You know, it's a huge dilemma for me, personally speaking. I don't know why they don't. They're on the world stage every second day, and I don't know why they don't pause, take a deep breath, and look around and see what's happening. You know, because I don't know myself on simple things like what is a Palestinian? What does the country stand for? What are you recognizing? You know, what are you recognizing today? Are you recognizing a death cult to lead a country? I don't know myself. I simply don't know. You know,
I can sort of I see, because I research it and look at it. I understand that. I don't agree with them at all, but I see a lot of European leaders and European governments, usually the leftist socialist ones, who've actually totally lost the plot with regard to control over their own country because of mass migration of a culture, as a friend of mine says, who bring their own baggage with them and then offload that baggage when they arrive in whatever countries they're in, whether it's France, Britain, or elsewhere, or Sweden, or whatever. And then suddenly the elected officials find, okay, my job is really to feather my own nest and appeal to these imported new Brits and French and Swedes or whatever, Irish, I don't know, problem is great over there in order to win their votes in their favor. And therefore they go completely off track and lose their basic traditional values of the countries that they were supposed to represent. And increasingly, I know in Britain, that if you go to the Midlands and the north of Britain, in fact, you will find that most of the towns and cities are now are represented, the mayors and the councils are representative of that imported culture. And I put it there, if they were, let's say, as has been happening in Britain in the past, they came from other countries and still wanted to help the community and be loyal to the traditional values of the host country, that's great. But there's a deeper thing going on here.
Oh, absolutely. And I often wonder, why do we, as you said, import or allow a sizable population of people who actually hate and detest our way of life in the West, and give them homes to live in and power as well in the local authorities? Why do we do that? Why are we doing that? It's beyond. It's a dilemma for everybody looking on in the sidelines, looking on, you know. And we've had various, particularly in Britain, we have various scandals going on. You know, the rape gangs of mainly Muslim men of Pakistani origin that rape and gang rape young English girls for years and years, and you probably heard all about that. And it's a blight on the community, it's a blight on society, and it's not being faced up to, and it's not being sorted out, which is another appalling vista that's visited upon the English people, you know.
But an addition of that is that when people speak up and want to act up against it in Britain, that you mentioned in the first place, people who do that are criminalized by the authorities. One of the main people that I know, for instance, is a guy called Tommy Robinson, who was one of the first to expose these gang rapes. And he was silenced by the British government. In fact, I think he was imprisoned by them.
He was.
So, you know, it's part of a West gone wrong, gone rotten. They've simply lost the direction, the moral compass.
And now you have...
And it's reflected in what they're doing now against Israel. And Palestinian is really, you never hear them talk about Hamas in this conversation. Have you noticed that? It's been Tipex out.
It is, yeah. They're trying to Tipex it out anyway. But you have a country then like France, who I visited. I was there last year as well. Macron, probably a very weak man, reflective of the fact that he recognises the state of Palestine. How did that go down over there, Larry?
I want to give you one personal example, if you want, of what I've been involved in the past and going on today in order to offset the lies that have been put out, not only by the governments, but the media. You know, so I don't expect any better what's coming out of the universities or whatever, because they were a lost cause. They were captured by the Muslim Brotherhood decades ago, and I can go into details of that. But and I guess a lot of the people in the media and the politics are basically coming out of what we call the conveyor belt of lies, which is the universities or whatever, and getting jobs in the media and in politics or whatever, and how they've been indoctrinated. It really fashions the way they think. And what I've noticed, sadly, every day, without end, Sky News, Sky News UK, for instance, is the most anti-Israel, I don't want to say anti-Semitic, but certainly anti-Israel TV channel in Britain, even probably greater than the BBC, I'm not saying. I was involved in one incident in which Anna Botting, the hostess in the studio, was interviewing a colleague of mine, Mark Regev. And Mark had gone in the studio not knowing about an incident that happened. And Anna Bottin accused him, basically him, of bombing a hospital in Gaza and killing 500 Palestinians.
I remember that story.
Remember that incident?
I do,
and
yeah.
Mark Regev was speechless. He said, I don't know what you're talking about, but perhaps you should wait until you've got the facts and the evidence. And Anna Botín said the two words no TV journalist should ever use, not interested. And she finished the conversation. I got on the phone to a colleague of mine, Jonathan Turner from UK Lawyers for Israel. It's an organization of lawyers set up in order to offset the lies and the accusations and often some of the cases brought against Israel. And I asked him, did you see that program? And he said he hadn't. I said, please try and get a copy of that program. I want you, UK Lawyers for Israel, to demand an apology from Sky News, and particularly Anna Botín, for saying not interested in waiting for the facts. I also got on the phone to a colleague of mine, Peter Lerner. He was the IDF spokesman, military spokesperson. And I said, Peter, tell me what happened in Gaza with this hospital. And he said, we're getting information. We think we know what it is. I'll call you back. And he called me back within an hour. And he told me the Israeli intelligence had received an intercept in Arabic of somebody representing Palestinian Islamic Jihad speaking to a colleague who is Hamas, talking about an errant rocket that had been fired into Israel but had fallen somewhere in Gaza, and it had fallen in the car park of the Al-Ali hospital in Gaza. So here we have evidence that in fact the rocket was a Palestinian rocket.
Yes.
No apologies by Sky News, no apologies by the BBC that they had given their audience a pack of lies.
Yeah.
None whatsoever.
But
anybody who saw that program will still believe we bombed the hospital, killing 500 people. We don't know. We assume there's about 30, 40 people that have been killed in the car park, not 500. But let me tell you something. That statistic of 500 dead Gazans are still in the statistic of the Palestinian Ministry of Health, which is Hamas propaganda.
Yeah, and they're continuing their lies and their mistruths up to today. Both Sky News and the BBC are, you know. I just wonder, is there any standards anymore in broadcast news? In the media, is there any standards to live up to? Because if you listen to RTE News in Ireland, which is the main public service broadcaster that's funded by the government, gave RTE, wait for it, £750 million for the next 3 years to spew their lies, you know? That's a radio, television, and our national broadcaster. It's appalling carry on, you know? And they're speaking about the war in Gaza as if they're well informed. They're speaking about the war on a daily basis, and they're taking their news from Hamas mainly, because they don't have anybody on the ground in the area as well to be informed of these things. And I think it's very, very sad indeed, very, very sad and disturbing.
But it's going on today, where again, Sky News, BBC, all the media, as well as the politicians, are accusing us of imposing famine on the people of Gaza. They show these pictures that are not coming from Gaza at all. They're coming from other places, Yemen and other places, of mothers with emaciated-looking babies, putting it out as part of an Israeli famine policy in Gaza, which is a total pack of lies. And most of these pictures are not of their children in Gaza at all, but children or babies that are suffering from some genetic disease or disorder or something, which is pathetic, which is sad, which is tragic. But it's not caused by an Israeli-imposed famine in Gaza. And quite frankly, if you see some of the pictures coming out and you look at thin babies or children, I've always advised over my social media, look at the mother that's holding the baby. They seem to be remarkably well fed.
Yes, they are. And
rushing towards aid, you know, the aid station. They don't look starving, are they, these men that are picking up these packages and taking them back to their families?
If there was a famine, and I don't believe there is, if there was a famine in Gaza, as you said, Barry, it wouldn't just affect children. It would affect everybody, you know, everybody. And that is not the case. And really and truly, you know, if they did any investigation of the facts, but they're not interested in facts. They're interested in their own facts, what they broadcast and describe as facts, which is very, very sad, you know. And
But what I was doing for much of last year via my various social media posts was putting out on a daily basis the statistics and the facts of an organization called COGAT, COGAT, and that is the official Israeli humanitarian aid organization that gives listing of everything that goes into Gaza on a daily basis. And if I'm taking here, and I've got the paper in front of me here, if you even take the facts of the United Nations themselves about the requirement of food requirements in Gaza for the population of Gaza, Israel has been delivering more tons of food than required by the United Nations themselves. Now, recently, there was a video that went out, and one of the people that was there, because we invited international journalists and others to view it, was Colonel Richard Kemp, of the former of the British Armed Forces, for instance. So he was there reporting on it, and they reported of 120 trucks loaded up with aid that was supposed to have been picked up by the United Nations, but the United Nations, in defiance of Israel, because we have a private US aid organization distributing food. So instead of complaining as they're doing in the United Nations, they probably, unless they picked it up this morning, it's been sitting there for a week, 120 trucks of aid waiting for the United Nations to take into Gaza, and they didn't do it. Because one of the conditions were they deliver it to a place that is not controlled by Hamas, and they refused to do it. And why do we want it not delivered to a place under the auspices of the United Nations that's controlled by Hamas? Because Hamas steals it. They give the aid to the people who are working for them, or they put it on the market and they sell it. And they have been making billions since the 7th of October, billions selling food to Gazans under the auspices of the United Nations. And the United Nations officials who fly first class on their privileged salaries and everything don't want this corrupt system to end. This is the truth of what's going on right now.
So not alone does a country like Israel, where war was declared on the 7th of October, not alone is it expected to fight a war, but it's expected to feed the people as well who are fighting against it. It's a unique situation in the world, and it has to stop sometime. Barry, where do you think this is all going to end?
On social media,
This war this war has to end someday.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. Say again.
Well, where do you think this war is going to end someday?
It depends. It depends to a large extent right now on President Trump. And President Trump came up with a statement last night saying that the clock is ticking on Hamas, because we went into negotiations for the release of our hostages as part of a ceasefire.
Yeah.
We had a bit of a ceasefire yesterday to allow aid to come into Gaza. However, Hamas can see that the world is turning against Israel based on this fiction of a famine, and they're going to play on that. So I think we're going to hear within 2 to 3 days of whether they can come up with a solution that Hamas has rejected, or whether we actually go in and finish the job. Putting it statistically, we now control almost 75% of the Gaza Strip. I could tell you where the main headquarters of the remaining 18 to 20,000 Hamas terrorists are. That's based in Gaza City, under the hospital in Gaza City. And that's probably where the range of our hostages are being held there. because they are human shields for the Hamas terrorists.
Oh yes.
So that if you begin to hear that the Israeli army are starting to intensify our actions in the north of Gaza, particularly approaching the Gaza city, you know we're about to close up and finish the job on Hamas. And we have to finish it as quickly as we can. It could go on for another month or so. It probably has to finish by September, October.
And what is the political situation on the ground in Israel today?
Israel is a very tired and exhausted nation right now. Today, I think it's the 660th day of war. Israel usually fights 6-day wars, 7-day wars. Even the war against Iran, we did it in 12 days. But this has been dragged out deliberately by Hamas and deliberately by the international pressure, not on Hamas, but on Israel. There has been zero, with a capital Z, zero pressure imposed by your government or any other government or the United Nations on Hamas. Zero. And that has been the biggest sin of this war. This has been the biggest crime of this war. If the United Nations, if your government had said, Hamas, you must give up all of the Israeli hostages today and surrender your arms, we will impose on Israel not just a ceasefire, but an end of war. Because until that happens, there will not be an end of the war.
No, there won't.
Thing to do. An island, you can host the leaders of Hamas, give them safe passage from the Gaza city to Dublin and host them, just as others are being hosted in Qatar, in Doha, or in Istanbul. You want to be generous to the Palestinians? Your government should say to Hamas, release the Israeli hostages, give up your arms, we will guarantee you safe passage to live in luxury here in Dublin. And you would end the war tomorrow.
Absolutely, without a shadow, and that's a positive note. I had the feeling myself, Barry, that would be the end game myself, that they would release all the remaining hostages, and I think the war would swiftly come to an end, and they could get back to whatever they want to get back to. I don't know, what the long term. I think myself that the long term solution, or in my view, is that the Gaza Strip and the West Bank would become United Nations protectorates.
Heaven forbid. The United Nations should have nothing to do with anything to do with the Palestinians. I'm talking about the Palestinian Authority. The United Nations have been responsible in their UNRWA program of indoctrinating Palestinian children since the age of 5 and 6 to be indoctrinated into hatred of Jews and a world without Israel. It's in their school books. If you interview a couple of my friends, whether it's Hillel Noor of UN Watch or our friend David Badin of the Center of Near East Policy, they have documented in Arabic and translated in different languages the indoctrination being done under the auspices of the United Nations. United Nations is the last chamber that should be anywhere near Gaza because they have been instrumental in the failure of Gaza.
You're saying that they are directly responsible for that death cult we call Hamas.
Let me give you my proposal that I wrote about going back December 2023, which the solution for Gaza should be what I call an Abraham Accords protectorate. I'm not saying that Israel should occupy Gaza. I don't want to see my grandchildren patrolling the streets of Gaza as an Israeli.
Yeah.
But the hope for Gaza is something completely new, and the Palestinian Authority, the corrupt Palestinian Authority, should be nowhere near the place. It should be an Abraham Accord protectorate in which the local population will elect their leaders, as they're starting to do today. Because in Rafah, for instance, the main population in Rafah belonged to a tribe called the Al-Shabaab tribe, who opposed Hamas. And there are other tribes in Gaza as well. But you could pick local leaders, and then the reconstruction of Gaza would be done, as Trump has said. He wants to see the Riviera of the Middle East as Gaza. He will put up the money with the wealthy Arab states as well. But part of that has to be, an essential element of that has to be the de-radicalization. And that's why I call it a protectorate. Because I took my example, for instance, of Europe after the Allies had succeeded in taking Germany. Actually, it arrived in West Berlin because the Soviets were East Berlin. But what did the Allies do at the end of the Second World War? They not only reconstructed West Germany in the Marshall Plan, but part of it was the denazification of the Germans. They weren't going to build a new Germany, have a new Hitler come along and take it away. So the denazification, the de-radicalization was an essential part of that protectorate scheme. And the same happened with America in Japan. Do you know that America unfurled 2 atom bombs on Japan before they surrendered? And what the Americans did is they took over and controlled Japan and they rebuilt it. But the de-radicalization of the Japanese, that they would become imperialist, was an essential part of that. And today, Japan is perhaps the most liberal, democratic, prosperous country in Asia. So there's 2 examples for you. This could happen in Gaza, but along with the reconstruction has to come the de-Islamization of that place, the de-radicalization of that place. So a new generation can emerge that didn't know of Hamas, that know of and want to have a modern, prosperous, democratic society. And I think part of the, ending on a positive note, what I suggested then in December 2023, that this new model of peace in the Middle East, this new state of Gaza, should be presented to the United Nations by the Abraham Accord protectorate countries as a new member of the United Nations. And at the same time, let the Palestinians in Rafah and the other places try and solve themselves in that image, but on no condition bring the corrupt people over there, the Mahmoud Abbasis of Ramallah, to take charge of Gaza, because we'll have the same problem again. If they will take the money and they'll be teaching the indoctrination.
But they must be confident, Hamas and Dahi, today as we're talking, they must be confident of their vast support in the Muslim countries around them.
Of course. But quite frankly, countries like Saudi Arabia know this. For instance, Saudi Arabia, the crown prince there would be very keen to adopt this sort of thing, but he can't do it right now because he doesn't want to become, Trump wanted the crown prince of Saudi Arabia to declare right now he would become a member, a partner on the Abraham Accords, and he refused to do it. He refused to do it because it was at a time where he felt if he did it, he would be the next Sadat. Sadat was the Egyptian leader who had the courage to declare peace, a proper peace with Israel. And he was assassinated by his own people for doing that.
Yes, he was. I must say that, yeah. He was, yes, indeed.
Not in the leaders, but in the people. So Saudi Arabia has to do their own denazification, Islamization, if you want to call it that, in their own country. But there are other moderate, wealthy, very wealthy Arab countries like the United Arab Emirates, that's a great example, Bahrain, Morocco even, who have made peace. And the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates is not afraid of his people. So the Emirate ideas imposed on Gaza would be actually a model fashioned on the United Arab Emirates.
Well, Barry, it's been an eye-opening hour this morning with you from Israel, and I wish yourself and your family all the best of good luck, and hopefully this horrific war will come to an end soon, and truth always wins out in the end. We like to say that. We like to hope for it as well, and I think it will myself. So from
I want to thank you and your followers for your support. It's not lost on us.
and I
It's very important to us.
Yeah, and I think Israel should be confident in the fact that not everybody in this small island of ours in Ireland is against the state of Israel. An awful lot of us are not. Not of us are really understand these things. And the fact that our leaders like Simon Harris and Micheál Martin are embarrassing themselves on a daily basis on the world stage has nothing to do with the generality of the Irish people. I like to think that myself. We are a generous people, and having been in your beautiful country, I think that the resilience of the Israeli people will win out in the end. I think they will myself.
Yeah, you're right. As we said in this program, and perhaps the message to leave all those who are watching us on this program, and I hope this applies to your leaders as well. When you want to impose a Palestinian state, are you really sure you know who is going to lead and rule that Palestinian state?
That's
If you
true.
don't begin it. That's a very dangerous path to nowhere.
Indeed, but so from Ballyshore and myself, from this edition of the show, thank you very much, Barry, for your time, and we'll catch up again. We catch up again very soon. We won't leave it as long the next time.
Thank you, and thanks for your support.
Bye bye. Shalom.
Shalom. Bye.